exploring Nigeria's rich landscape history. Landscape architecture and landscape history are emerging disciplines that are not very well known and not fully understood. And so I think this evening we are going to learn a lot more about them. So I'm going to start by introducing to you our guest presenter. It's my pleasure to do so. I'd like to introduce Tobiloba Akibo, who will be making the presentation for us. Before she starts, I just want to tell you a little bit about her. She's an architect who has specialized in landscape architecture. And apart from managing and designing a wide variety of projects and master plans in different parts of Nigeria, Tobiloba has also conducted research on historic landscapes in Nigeria. She's a member of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS, Nigeria. She is Communications and External Relations Chair of the International Federation of Landscape Architects Africa. And she's also a member of Legacy, the Historical Environmental Interest Group of Nigeria. So we're really, really pleased. Thank you, Tobiloba, for preparing a presentation for us this evening. And I must say that I am so happy about this evening because I suggested to her the idea of doing a webinar on her work when she was telling me what her work was. I think this was about 4 or 5 years ago. We had this conversation about having this kind of webinar. And so I'm so pleased that we are finally going to do it. So Tobiloba, while I don't want you to give too much away about your presentation, I just want to start by asking you a couple of questions. First of all, what inspired you, first of all, to become an architect and then go further to become a landscape architect?
Thank you, Mrs. Adeleke. Good evening, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here. And architecture for me when I started in school was, from secondary school basically, was the buildings interested me generally. But then when I finished my first degree, I decided to go into landscape architecture because the concept of what a garden and park looks like is very, very different from architecture. So for architecture, once you have a building, essentially it's done. So once you finish building, in the next 100 years or 50 years that the building is still standing, it looks the same. But for landscape architecture, once a garden always looks different every time you come there. And I found that very, very fascinating. That was the initial pull for landscape architecture for me. But when I started my program at the University of Lagos, landscape architecture, I realized that landscape architecture was a bunch of a whole other things that was not just about planting and doing garden design. And the more I got into landscape architecture in school, the more the different facets of it interested me, and also the fact that there are different aspects of landscape architecture that can fit into other design fields, and that was very, very fascinating for me.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So as they say, without further ado, I would like you to begin your presentation, which will be followed by a question and answer session. And I would be grateful if everybody would keep their speakers firmly on mute. Thank you very much. So Tobiloba, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen now with my presentation. I hope you can all see my screen. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about landscape architecture and historic preservation and conservation in architecture, and how that has informed some of the projects and the research that I've been working on for the past 2-3 years. So essentially, when I started, I usually ask myself this question, is like, why am I doing something? So and this question came about when I had a conversation with a group of architects and landscape architects across the world, and they have an NGO, a design-based NGO that essentially tries to dismantle white oppression across the world, basically. And one of their key design philosophies, or one of their key manifestos, basically is when we draw, we fight. So when we do research, ask yourself, who or what exactly are you fighting for? And that informs a lot of the decisions that I try to make in my work and in my research, which brought me essentially to heritage landscapes. And so basically what I'm trying to say is that every time I'm doing any kind of research or any kind of work, I'm essentially trying to say that I want to be able to I want us to fight for our rights to tell our own stories and basically be the curators and guardians of our history. So going with that in mind, basically that was when the concept of cultural landscapes became even more fascinating to me, because and again, I mean, from the very beginning, I cut my teeth with Legacy. I started essentially started the core of my volunteer work at Legacy. And as a lot of us all know, Legacy is a historic NGO that focuses on historic sites, buildings, and monuments. But I also realized that during my time there, most of the core of Legacy's work at the time was focused more on buildings. And then as a landscape architect, I then started to think of, like, okay, so what happens to the surrounding sites around the buildings? A lot of focus or attention is not placed on them as a core heritage site, as opposed to just the buildings. Is usually just taken as an added to to the building. But cultural landscapes basically it's with the buildings, the landscapes, everything about it, like basically how we interact with nature, with sites, with the environment, and basically physical environment around us. So which was what interested me about cultural landscapes. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of case studies that I've worked on in the past. And so I'm going to start with this project, this place where I know a couple of us might know about it. It's called Palava Island, or a lot of people know it as Palava Island. And for me as a landscape architect, talking about heritage sites, the importance of sites that do not have any buildings on it is very, very important. So which is why when I found out about Palava Island, I was the core of what Lagos is today, is, and a lot of people don't know much about Palava Island. So essentially I'm going to talk a bit about Agbeki. So it's actually called Agbeki and Arekin Islands. So it is just a brief history about Agbeki and Arekin Islands. It's in the middle of the lagoon. If any one of us know our Lagos locations very well, it's in between Langbasa and Bayeku. Langbasa is in Aja in Lagos, and then Bayeku is in Ikorodu. So the story of why Agbeki Island is actually very, very important in Lagos as a British colony first, and also Lagos as a place, essentially, is that back I will not go too deep into the wars and everything that happened at the time, but we all do know that Kosoko at the time was exiled to Ekpe when he fought with Oba Akitoye at the time. So when he was exiled to Ekpe, and of course, as an exiled ex-king himself, he was very, very disgruntled. And back then they used to, the trade routes were from Ijebu and Abeokuta, and they usually landed in Ejiri. And then from Ejiri, they take their boats to Lagos at the time. So once you're coming from Ejiri and you're going to Lagos, you pass through Palava Island or Agbeke Island. So what then used to happen was Kosoko used to pillage the goods then, and of course it was terrible because you couldn't get goods back to Lagos, and then you basically couldn't do anything at the time. So which was also what led the British then at the time to also try to attack Ekpe, but unfortunately they were not successful. And because of that, they had to essentially re-strategize their plan on what they were going to do about Kosoko at the time. So Agbeke Island is very, very important because when these peace treaties and these peace talks were happening, there had to be a place where they couldn't meet in Ekpe, obviously, they couldn't meet in Lagos, they couldn't meet anywhere. So Agbeke Island was the most logical place for them to meet, then. So which was where that happened. And then so all the conversations and all the meetings they had that culminated in the 1854 Ekpe Treaty, all of that happened at Agbeke Island. So and I think for me personally, as a landscape architect and a historian, I think that is very, very important for us to put that in context with what Lagos is today. Because if those meetings didn't happen, if all of these things didn't happen, there won't be nobody will know anything about Agbeke Island, So so that was where all of that interest for me came in as a landscape architect and as a heritage enthusiast, basically. So yeah, so like I said, initially in January in 1854, they call it the Langbasa meeting, that's where it happened, and then yeah, so essentially this map just shows you exactly where Palava Island is in along the Lagos Lagoon. So like I said, it's in between Langbasa and Bayeku in Ikorodu. So yeah, so for me, essentially, basically what I'm just trying to do is, like I said, show you a couple of case studies of cultural landscape sites that I have done research on. So some of these research are not complete yet because, again, because it's a very landscape architecture as a profession generally in Nigeria, it's a very nascent profession. We're still very young, so we do not have there's not a lot of deep research that has gone into all of this into all of these other aspects of landscape architecture that we know. So yeah, so this is the first case study that I worked on, and for me, again, like I said, it's the question is, why am I even doing this research? What is the importance? Why do we even need to preserve these sites? And personally, yes, we all know it as Palava Island, but I do think that as a British concept, we should, give it its real name, which is Agbeke Island, and then the small islands beside it. There are two small islands beside it. They're called Areke Island. And interestingly enough, I've seen so many. I've seen some claims in some towns like, for example, in Bayeku, that says that they own the land, but there's also some other towns around that Ikorodu area that also lay claim to the land. But really, that's not really what here to talk about. But it's just very interesting to hear some of all these very deep, rich history about Lagos that a lot of us do not know about, and knowing the significance of this island in the history of Lagos as a city, and also, in fact, in the history of Lagos as a British colony, is very, very important that these stories are being told, and people we're aware that these are sites that do need recognition and all of that. So from the very beginning, for cultural landscapes, essentially, there are two major types of classifications that that are used worldwide to do cultural landscapes. And for me, I have focused on working on using the National Park Services, which is in the US, guidelines as a guide for classifying most of these heritage sites. So the next case study I'm going to share with you is in Ibadan. It's called Obomoje Court. Now, in this project I worked on mid last year, 2023, in June. It was a residency, and I spent about 6 weeks in Ibadan. And the importance of this project for me was essentially due to the person that used to live in that house as a resident. So I'm going to move on very quickly to that. So Obomoje Court used to be the personal residence of Alaja Sulia Adedeji. I know some of us might know who she was. Some of us do not know her. I personally, even myself, before I started this project, I just heard her name in passing. But by the time I delved deep into her as a person, I realized that, working on classifying her residence as a heritage site is important, because a lot of us do know about Funmilayo Ransome Kuti as an activist in Nigeria at the time, but a lot of people don't know who Sulia Adedeji was. She was also a political figure. She was an activist, and she was also a philanthropist at the time. And unfortunately, she was murdered during one of the military eras. So, which is why I focused on her residence as a historic site. And like I said, I'm using the NPS's classifications, which is not very, very different from the UNESCO's classification, for example. There are a few differences between them, but yeah, that's another conversation entirely. But the core of the classification is essentially the same, in the sense that we are trying to classify a site, and there are a lot of factors and a lot of key things that we need to look out for. And so essentially for me, this project was me focusing on looking at the tangible and the intangible assets of the sites that would make it a heritage site. And the core of that is in Sulia Adedeji as a person. And also a lot of the other factors that I looked into was looking at the historical differences from when the site was initially built to what it is currently now. There's been quite a few changes, and a lot of some of these changes are very, very are quite cosmetic, and it doesn't take away from the core of the site itself. So essentially, I was working on it's being classified as a historic site due to the significance of who Sulia Adedeji was. So some of the characteristics I looked at was the views of the site, the building structures that are on the site, the features, the vegetation. Also, the vegetation is very, very important also. And in fact, the patterns of, how the humans have essentially influenced, because again, a lot of cultural heritage sites really is just about how humans influence and interact with the environment. So it's like also looking at how humans that have lived on that, on that particular site have influenced and, made changes to the site over time. So I also looked at the land use, the historical activities of the land at the time, and then also several cultural traditions that were existing on the site. Because also another interesting thing is, because Sulia Adedeji was a Muslim, she had some part of the site as a sacred space for her spiritual for her spirituality, basically. And also, okay, like I said, I did some a bit of historical comparison between 2019 and 2023, and also while the period where she lived in that building is also, like I said, it's very, very important to make some of all these comparisons of the landscapes at different periods. But what I did find out was that, like, a lot of data was not was generally scarce and not available. A lot of it was also oral data. I had to do a few interviews with her children that that lived where we had when she was life. And then also part of the work that I was also doing on that site was looking at what the treatment plan was, because as for cultural landscapes, you also want to look at what kind of treatment plans that you take on when the initial survey and research is done. So while I was doing the historical comparison, there has been some sort of treatment plan that has gone on before I came in, which was some of it was rehabilitation and also preservation, because the building was the site itself and the building was built around 1950s. So some of that needed some rehabilitation, some repair, very, very few alterations, and also the focus of that was preserving the existing structures and the existing sites on the existing structures and the existing plants on the site. So that's pretty much that's it about Kobomoje Court. So I'm also going to be talking about a few other places I spent some time in Ibadan. One of them is Irefin Palace. Irefin Palace, it was built in 113 years ago, and the significance of the site is because it's a historic site and also an ethnographic site. It was a palace at the time, but currently it's also still a palace right now, and the building is still intact for the most part of it. It was built in 1910. So some of the very specific landscape characteristics that speaks about the integrity of the site basically is some of the views from the hilltop, the architectural elements of the building structures, and also the way the space has been used over the years, and the way the space changes and has been changing over the years essentially. Then another important thing is also the sacred elements within the site, because there's some places that we couldn't go into, and then also where they worship Ogun and Eshu. Then the other site I'm going to be talking about also is this man-made river. Sorry, this is the man-made river in Ibadan. It's called the Eleyele Lake. So Eleyele Lake was established as a result of trying to dam the Ona River. And another just something really interesting about cultural landscapes is the fact that while some of them might be man-made, it's again the core of cultural landscapes really is how do humans interact with the environment. So taking all of that into context is how you try to figure out and establish, okay, so which sites are important and which sites do you think that should be recognized and basically established as a heritage site or as a site that is important to the people. Again, this is the key, the core of this, again, at the end of the day, is also the people that use the space and people that own it, what do you think is important to them personally? Okay, so before I go into that, I'll wrap this up very soon. So I was talking about the Eleyele Lake, which was a man-made dam that was built to dam the Ono River. And also currently what it also does is a very, very rich wetland and riparian forest reserve for a lot of interesting plants and and animals. So I categorize this as a historic vernacular site because the space has evolved, because it didn't used to be a dam. It was dammed as a result of a specific need for the community, and then it's currently also serving other different factors. Then the very last site I'm also going to be talking about is the Botanical Gardens in University of Ibadan. This is a historic landscape, owing basically largely to the fact that it was established about 75 years ago, and so many of the, a lot of the trees in the arboretum, they are quite old, and it's very important that it was built as part of the University of Ibadan when it's basically built the same time, around the same time that University of Ibadan was built. So so this is an interesting historic landscape, while a lot of it is being dilapidated basically, but it's also a really, really interesting and important site, because there's a lot of trees and plants that have been there for years. So the only last thing I really want to say about cultural landscapes is essentially is the fact that it's very, very, very important that is the owners of the sites, or the custodians of the sites that use these sites, are the ones that they're the ones that will essentially tell you or any other person is like, okay, this is why this site is significant. This is why this site is important. For me personally, when talking about Agbekin Island in particular, I think that while it's important for us to preserve the sites, I know that, the question now comes up on, what parts of this site do we preserve? What is necessary for preservation? The conversation about using it as a footstool for the bridge, for Fort Milan Bridge, has always been in progress. And the question also comes up about what is more important. Is it preserving the site as it is, or making use of the site and paying homage to its significance as a part of Lagos's history? So for me, my own point of view is that it's very like my point of view is that the site is important as a heritage site, or the focus should shift from an actual physical heritage site to a more knowledge-based approach to preserving the site. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tobiloba. That was really very, very, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so amazing. I mean, this is an area that not many people are talking about. And I just want to make a few points before we sort of go on to the question and answer. I mean, in Nigeria, we have 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites that can be classified as landscape heritage. We have Suka in Adamawa State, and we also have the Ocean Groves in Oshogbo. Oshogbo. And the thing is, even if you ask today very well-educated Nigerians whether they know about them, most of them wouldn't know about these places. And so much more has to be done to educate people about these sites, because they're so important. And, I was quite fascinated when you were talking about Palava Island. And when you look at the Lagos Lagoon today, it's so empty, but you can imagine that back in the 18th, 19th century, there were canoes going up and down, and there was so much happening there. And there was a lot of warfare, battles. There were so many things going on there. And I also read that from Lagos Island to Palava Island, which is Agbekin, it took 3 hours in a canoe. So I just wonder how long it takes now. And I was also going to, then I think it was inhabited. But I was also going to, I mean, I have lots of questions to ask you, but I know lots of other people do. So I'm not going to sort of say too much, but I just wanted to ask you that have you visited Palava Island, Agbekin? Have you been there?
Yes, I have visited the place a couple of years ago, and it didn't take me 3 hours, that's for sure. I think it took me about 30 minutes, really. And yeah, so again, the interesting thing about, how busy that place was in the past was one of my research that I did for my master's program was I looked at Ejiri as a town, and then there used to be this saying that Ebenezer Obey used to sing. He used to say, Boko kon lo Ejiri, egbegbenu alo. So essentially it was like, if one boat doesn't go to Ejiri today, there'll be thousands of other boats that would go because of how busy Ejiri market was back then. So exactly. So so it means that, in fact, at the time, Kosoko's pillaging of these trade routes was very, 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 very problematic to them, because you do know that Lagos Island currently, that was Lagos back then, they didn't use, like, their goods used to come from Ejiri and not actually from the other side, even though they were on, along the coastline. Their goods used to come in from the hinterland, from like Ijebu and Abeokuta at the time. So it then used to come into into Lagos. So yes, so exactly. So yeah, I've been there once, and yeah.
Yeah. So is it is there a village there? I mean, what is happening there? I mean, is there anything there to sort of note that it's a historic site? I mean, what's happening? Are people sort of taking care of it? I mean, as a historic place, I mean, what's happening there today?
So as far as I do know, what is happening there right now is that nothing is happening. That's what's happening. Nothing is happening. And I think that was also due to the fact that there are plans for the Fort Mainland Bridge to fall, one of the bases of the bridge to fall at the island itself. So yes, as far as I do know, there's nothing going on there. Nothing is basically uninhabited right now.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm sure lots of people
Yes.
have some questions, comments, and I would just like to say that, if you have any questions, if you could sort of, or comments, if you could make them as succinct as possible, so that you can either raise your hand or you could put your question in the chat. So I think we'll sort of open everything for questions now. Okay, I can see Dayo Ajayobe. Please, could you unmute? Thank you very much and welcome.
Hello, I'm Dayo Ajayobe. I'm actually a pediatrician, but I'm actually interested in history. I want to ask, are there any attempts to actually get some of these programs or information into schools? I know that history maybe is not a major thing, but I think it's important that we begin to make these things come alive in the schools, perhaps even as a co-curriculum.
Okay, I think I don't know who, I don't know, Tobiloba, did you hear that question?
I didn't hear everything,
yeah.
but I just
I think the question was that, all of this kind of information about historic landscapes and, how are we able to get these things into schools? Because I know one of the big issues at the moment is that, history wasn't really being taught in schools, but they're trying to bring it back now. So, I think there's a lot going on. I don't know quite how far, but have you sort of come across any sort of outreach in terms of education with young people on this area?
Personally, no, but I do know that there are a couple of programs in archaeology, which is not really a core of landscape architecture. My experience, in school was that while I was a student, and it was a few of these things that were mentioned in passing that I then again took as a personal interest of mine, and there was no actual program course that was taken as a historic landscapes, for example, or cultural landscapes, of course. And yes, you're very right. It's very, very important that these some of this information and these things are, are part of our curriculum, because if we I only really know about it because of my own personal interest in the subject matter. And I know that, like I said, I cut my teeth with Legacy, and it was while I was volunteering at Legacy that some of this information came to me, and also the fact that I also saw some gaps in in the work we were doing there. And I was, as a landscape architect, I took it upon myself to familiarize myself with this other aspects of historic landscapes that were not taught in school. But yes, we definitely do need more this information in schools.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Abioye Ayeni, could you please unmute yourself?
Thanks so much, Tobiloba. Thanks so much for the presentation. At least I know one or two new things now. I want to ask, how now we know about it. Taking a visit to the place, how do we go? How does one go there? And what do you need permission from anybody? So two questions: the logistics of getting there, the safety of getting there, and do you need to ask anybody permission before you set foot on the island? Thank you.
Okay, good question. No, I mean, I went there because basically, the only access to the place is by boat. So I went there, and I didn't ask anybody's permission. I don't think you do it currently, because there's nothing going on the site, like I said right now. And most of the conversation has always been around using it as part of the Fort Milan Bridge. So yes, you can access the site very easily.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting when you mentioned that they're thinking of actually using that place as, to sort of maybe cut across with the third mainland bridge. And I'm just wondering whether, I don't know whether it's the federal government or the state government, whether they are aware that it's such a historic place, and that there could be some issues there. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has got their hand up at the moment. Right. Well, I just wanted to also sort of ask you a slightly different question, and this is more about landscape architecture as a profession, in terms of all the heritage work and preservation that you're doing. I mean, how is it sort of for people as a job, as a career opportunity, in terms of finding opportunities? I mean, how have you found it as a landscape architect? Because it's not something that is so common.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Adeleke. So I would use my own experience again to answer the question. So like I said previously, landscape architecture in Nigeria is a very new profession. A lot of the current landscape architects that we have actually have their background in architecture or in botany or in horticulture. So in fact, pretty much all of us didn't come with a first degree in landscape architecture. But that being said, there's been quite a bit of traction over the years, in the past few years, because there's some core work things that landscape architects can do that architects can't do, and then you find a few people that are knowledgeable, asking specifically for landscape architects in terms of work. Basically, there are different types, there are different spectrums of projects that a landscape architect can do, from garden design to parks and open spaces, public spaces, and all of that. And it's been an interesting journey for me, because I've worked on several different types of landscape projects, from small residential gardens to urban parks, like as big as 50,000 square meters in different parts of Nigeria, and even in some parts of Western Africa also. So I do want to, encourage a lot of people to try to learn more about the profession in Nigeria, and encourage more people to get on with the program. It's very interesting. It's landscape architecture is the profession that attempts to collaborate with other professionals especially in the design field, and also attempts to solve a lot of social issues that we have in the world today. A lot of conversations about climate change, a lot of conversations about the heat wave, a lot of this environmental problems can be solved using landscape and natural based solutions, which a lot of landscape architects have experience and expertise in.
Yeah, and if I could just go a little bit further in terms of you and your profession and what you do. You are a member of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS Nigeria, and you're also Communications and External Relations Chair of the International Federation of Landscape Architects Africa. So I would imagine that sort of keeps you very busy, and there must be a lot of things that are coming out from those organizations. So is there anything, that's happening, with those organizations and the sort of Nigeria, Africa, that looks to be very positive or exciting in any way?
Okay, so for IFLA Africa, essentially, there's quite a bit of projects that we've done. One of the very interesting projects that we worked on in the past was the African Landscape Network. So the African Landscape Network really is essentially, it's a map that shows you different landscape architects across Africa, and also different landscape architecture projects. So across different spectrums, from garden design to parks to heritage sites. So yeah, that map essentially shows you the different landscape projects. So what that does, what the African Landscape Network map does is that it helps landscape architects across Africa basically network, and also helps people outside the profession to see the kind of projects that landscape architects do. And also importantly is that it helps students that are landscape architecture students also see the kind of projects that they can work on, especially in countries that do not have landscape architecture universities. We don't have a lot of them across Africa. We have only 2 universities in Nigeria that offer the program, offer landscape architecture as a master's program, and we have 1 or 2 more of them trying to come up. And then so what the African Landscape Network map does is that it shows you the kind of projects you can possibly work on as a student, and then it also shows you the kind of projects that landscape architects work on. The other interesting project that we worked on at IFLA Africa also is the African Journal of Landscape Architecture. So it's essentially a journal that different landscape architects, not just landscape architects really, like just allied professions also, talk about solutions that landscape architects bring to some of these environmental issues that we have. The previous issue on that project on the journal was about community open spaces, and how we drive this conversation around building open spaces and public spaces for people to use and to enjoy and take ownership of essentially. So yeah, those are 2 of the really interesting projects that IFLA Africa has worked on recently, which I'm very more involved in than ICOMOS actually.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see that Ifeloju Olusoya has a hand up. Please unmute.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to begin by thanking you for your interesting presentation. And it's also good that Nigerians are beginning to look at the landscape architecture domain. So I just have one question for you, and it's about your own perspective to landscape architecture. So I don't know if you're aware of UNESCO's cultural landscape declaration and then the historic urban landscape declaration. So in this sense, I'm trying to wonder, because it seems like you interplay between landscape architecture and monuments or historic preservation. So in that sense, do you conceive the historic urban landscape as a whole construct, or you're more particular about utilizing landscape heritage for what it is and for preserving it? So do you look at the other aspects of the cultural or historic urban landscape as to the buildings, the people, and how all of these together create the heritage that you then conceive as cultural landscape?
Yes, thank you for your question. Very interesting question, because I do believe that cultural landscapes as a concept essentially is how we human beings interact with the environment. So essentially it's, yeah, like you said, it's like, the buildings, everything about a site, how the landscapes has changed over the years. One of the characteristics of the classifications on the UNESCO's website is called the continuing landscapes. Essentially, it's, yeah, you do know that you want to preserve a site, but then there's land is not static. People use it for different purposes, so it continues to change over the years, even though it's a heritage site or it's a site that you want to protect, because you feel or the custodians of the site feel that it is important to recognize the site as a heritage site. So I think that yes, the entirety of cultural landscapes focuses on how we interact with the land and how it continues to change over the years. And again, also goes back to my own concept of what I think preservation of Agbeke Island should be, is that it's not we don't necessarily have to turn it into a protected site and just leave it as it is and not do anything with it. The concept of a continuing landscape means that you can still use Agbeke Island as for a different function, but also recognizing and focusing on knowledge-based heritage, intangible heritage, basically, and focusing on getting more people to know about it, and not necessarily just because again, some of even the concept of protecting a site is a bit problematic, because if you turn a site into a protected site, what happens to the people that want to use it? What happens to the people that use the site? You can't just protect the site and then just leave it protected and not do anything to it and say it's a protected site. There should be room for other approaches within that sphere.
Okay, thank you. I see that Yewande Adeleke has her hand up. Could you please unmute?
Thank you for your presentation, and it's very sort of interesting learning about these different sites. I just wanted to find out, could you tell me a bit more about maybe potentially about how the architecture and layout sort of, does it tell you anything about the cultural identity of the people who once inhabited these sites? And also how you talked about human activity and how that has sort of, changed, impacted the landscapes over time. So it would be good to know about those 2 points.
Thank you very much, Yewande. So using Agbeke Island as an example, yeah. What I did, and I went to the site, and also using some of the maps that I extracted from Google Earth, from old maps. Basically, it doesn't so most times it doesn't really show you it doesn't show you the entirety of what how the site has been used over the years. It gives you a little glimpse, and it helps you to basically postulate that, oh, okay, maybe, yeah, because for example, like Agbeke Island had some at some point I'd seen some kind of like foundations. So maybe it was showing me that, or maybe somebody built something there as you can't really tell because of the location of the site, and also the fact that it's the ownership of that particular island is contested. There's no real, you can't really say for sure in that particular instance. But a lot of oral history also tells you that most, like, it's the land is just just there, and nothing much goes on the side. Because I also think that a lot of people's assumption is that it's not actual land, because from a distance, if you're passing by the island, you just see a couple like a bit of some foliage around the site, but you can't really tell that there's actual land there, and it just feels like some sort of mangrove wetland, and not actual land. So essentially, some architectural drawings will tell you about the history of the place, but most importantly is also having a holistic understanding of not just using that, but also using a lot of oral historic tellings from the custodians of any other sites. Basically, yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I would just like to sort of follow up to that question. What is the relationship between landscape architects and archaeologists? Because, I would love to go to Palava Island, because I'm sure that all around that area, if you dig deep, there will be lots of things there, because there was so much warfare. There were so many canoes that were sort of lost. They had cannon. They had so many things. There was so much going on during that period. I mean, if you read the history of what was happening in Lagos, in the mid-19th century. So do landscape architects have a relationship? I mean, they must have some kind of relationship, but I don't know what the relationship is and how you would work. Because, I mean, you're not actually an archaeologist, so you're not going to really start digging down and kind of. But then again, I'm sure it somehow does inform what you're doing or what you're trying to achieve.
Yes, I think that, yeah, there's a relationship between landscape architecture, or like heritage landscape architects basically, and archaeologists. And a lot of the work I do as a heritage landscape architect essentially is focusing on research and more so it's not like the actual digging on sites, but it's a lot of also understanding what the archaeologists have found, and also trying to make the connections of how these interactions work. So what I would say is that archaeologists and landscape architects work hand in hand, and there's a collaboration between them, because a lot of what the archaeologists find, there's a lot of work for the landscape architects to interpret these findings, and also make the connection of how the wars have, again, for example, for Agweken Island, how the wars have affected the use of that place. Because, for example, if Kosoko was not exiled, he wouldn't have used that site, and also is also the storytelling aspect of it, and understanding how all of this, understanding the story of how these wars have happened and how they affected, the use of that site.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. What I would also sort of like to add here is that I mean, there was a huge amount of interest in this particular topic, and I know that quite a few people were unable to join this evening, because I don't know whether people know, but across West Africa, there's been some kind of internet problem. And so a lot of people's internet has gone down, and that has sort of disrupted things. But, just to mention a few other things, I'm just thinking that, maybe we should sort of turn this into some kind of series. I mean, I'm just thinking aloud here. because, for example, we have Oyo Ile, Old Oyo, and I know that, excuse me, I know that there are some people, I mean, there are a lot of people outside of Nigeria who are working on these subject areas. And I think a lot of people have done research, but this research is not being shared. I also know Sumbos Eredo, Espe, which is, I've been there. I mean, that place is absolutely magical. I know that people are doing research into that. And you see, a lot of people in Nigeria are living very, very close to historic landscapes, and they had no idea. I mean, for example, the Kiriji battlefield, you know, and, you know, I understand that that sort of area, they did actually put up some kind of monument there, but I'm sure many people pass that area all the time and they don't really know the history. So it will be interesting, because I know we have a lot of people here who are interested in this. And so it will be interesting if we can sort of try and find out who the people are who are doing the research into these areas. And so we could maybe sort of have some kind of series on landscape heritage, which would really help to enlighten a lot of people. So that's just an idea. You know, I don't know whether there's anybody here who sort of has you know, been doing any research that, you know, they would like to sort of maybe talk about in the future. But, you know, I think, you know, our details are, Legacy's details, I think, are in the chat on how to get in contact with us. I think Bukola, our membership secretary, has put our details there. And I think, I don't know, I think we have, if also, I think if we can also put our email contact. So if anybody wants to get in contact about, you know, research that they have been working on. So anyway, I think unless there are any other questions, or, you know, Tobiloba, if you have some final words that you would like to say, I think we might bring this to a close very soon. Are there any other things that you wish to add before we close?
Nothing much really. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Okay, I think we have a hand up. Sorry.
Okay.
We have a hand up. I think Hazan Adele has raised his hand. Please, could you unmute?
Yes, I just have a quick question. I'm based in the United States, but I was in Nigeria recently, and I went to Kano for a golf tournament. And this golf course actually has been there. Apparently, it's one of the, I think, the first or second golf course in Nigeria. And the issue they're having right now is that the government is trying to take, you know, quite a bit of the land. And from what I heard, there's a lot of history attached to the place. It was apparently the first airstrip in Kano, in northern Nigeria, that served not only the, you know, all the parts of, you know, when the British came, that's where they used. So how do you go about, but one of the questions they were talking about there, how do they go about making that place a heritage site? Do you have any advice? Because the captain of the club is a friend, and he was kind of concerned about what could they do to make it a heritage site.
Thank you. I think yes, in fact, that's a very interesting question, because again, the work I was doing for Kobomoje Court was also making all these research and survey to now establish it as a heritage site. The Nigerian Commissions for Museums and Monuments have a guideline for how to go about preserving a site and turning into a heritage site. I can possibly share that with Legacy, and probably when they are sending out the recordings, that can also be added to what is being shared. But essentially, the core of that is there's a lot of work that it involves, and part of the work that it involves, requires you to do a lot of all of this survey and research on classifying it using the NCMM's guidelines, and then it's going to be put out in the news in newspapers, if I remember correctly, asking asking for people's opinions and comments. You know, it's a very long process, really. And then essentially it ends with the president, you know, signing off on this site as a heritage site. Yes, that is the summary of how to go about, you know, essentially trying to have a site registered as a protected site for NTMM in Nigeria.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think I would just like to add a little bit to that, because I mean, I think Tobiloba has spoken about sort of getting recognition from like at the federal level. But I would say that, you know, first of all, you have to build community awareness about the importance of that site. And so to do a lot of, you know, raising awareness locally. And I think also on the site, if, you know, if the people can put up big signboards talking about, you know, the history and the background, because I'm sure lots of people wouldn't have known that it was the first airfield in Nigeria and things like that, and sort of trying to sort of, you know, use online resources, because I mean, online at the moment, it's, you know, there's so much going on in terms of people raising awareness about historic things online. And then I think also to get in contact, for them to make contact with the state government, because I know that at the moment, I mean, as Tobiloba said, it's a long process, you know, to go through to sort of get it recognized as a sort of a federal sort of monument of that nature. And I think that they are somehow overwhelmed with the number of things that they have to do. So I think that, you know, if it can start at the local level and the state level, and also to start, for people to start writing about it and publishing things, you know, online about the importance. And so so the story of this golf course and the history behind the land really gets out there in people's minds. That's what I would suggest as the first step. Okay. I'm just looking at the chat now. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, okay. Oh, well, somebody has put in the chat that the Kano golf course dates back to 1908. So you see already, you know, see, the interesting thing is when people talk to each other about these things, more information comes up. So it's very, very important to sort of to use, you know, Twitter, to use LinkedIn, to use, you know, Facebook or Instagram, all these things. Well, somebody here has come up with a little bit of information which maybe somebody else wouldn't have known. And so I think, yeah, I think that's probably the way to go. Okay, somebody else has put their hand up. Dayo Ajayi Obey, please, could you unmute?
Yes, I just want to say, I mean, it's nice to get networks when it comes to these big issues. The MRs and all that must have some historical interest in these things. So, like you said, I think it's social media, but getting a lot of the people who might actually be interested in these things, seeing where you can make those significant contacts, I think is also very important.
Yes, I think so as well, to sort of get some champions behind it. Yeah, I think to get some big names behind it to support you. So yes, to sort of target them so that you can have backing from some, you know, well-known people. I think that's how a lot of projects do get off the ground, when you have some people who are, you know, well placed in society to help, you know, be figureheads in some way. I think that's a great idea. Yes. Okay, I'm just checking now to see if there are any more questions. Okay, I think that in that case, I think we might bring it all to a close here. I would just like to say a big thank you to Tobiloba that at last we've managed to do this, and I hope that this will be the start of, you know, further discussions about landscape heritage and landscape architecture, because I know that there are people out there who are doing a lot of work, but we don't get to hear about what they're doing. And so if anybody here does sort of has done some research on an area that they would like to share, I think, you know, that we can work together and, you know, sort of put something on, again, similar. So I would just like to thank everybody for spending your time this evening with us, and thank you all for your questions and comments. Thank you very much. So I think we'll end it there. Thank you very much.